Bayard Taylor describes these statues in one of his lectures and tells us that the beauty of the heads ornamented with eyes of precious stones and copper eyelids is unsurpassed, far below the stratum of sand in which lay the remains gathered into the collections of Lepsius, Abbot, and the British Museum, were found buried the tangible proofs of the Hermetic doctrine of cycles, which has been already explained. Dr. Schliemann, the enthusiastic Hellenist, has recently found in his excavations in the Trode abundant evidences of the gradual change from barbarism to civilization, and from civilization to barbarism again. Why then should we feel so reluctant to admit the possibility that, if the antediluvians were so much better versed than ourselves in certain sciences as to have been perfectly acquainted with important arts, which we now term lost, they might have equally excelled in psychological knowledge? Such a hypothesis must be considered as reasonable as any other until some countervailing evidence shall be discovered to destroy it. Every true savant admits that in many respects human knowledge is yet in its infancy. Can it be that our cycle began in ages comparatively recent? These cycles, according to the Chaldean philosophy, do not embrace all mankind at one and the same time. Professor Draper partially corroborates this view by saying that the periods into which geology has found it convenient to divide the progress of man in civilization are not abrupt epochs which hold good simultaneously for the whole human race, giving us an instance the wandering Indians of America, who are only at the present moment emerging from the Stone Age. Thus more than one scientific men have unwittingly confirmed the testimony of the ancients. Any Kabbalist well acquainted with the Pythagorean system of numerals and geometry can demonstrate that the metaphysical view of Plato were based upon the strictest mathematical principles. True mathematics, says the Magicon, is something with which all higher sciences are connected. Common mathematics is but a deceitful phantasmagoria, whose much praised infallibility only arises from this. That materials, conditions, and references are made its foundation. Scientists who believe they have adopted the Aristotelian method only because they creep when they do not run from demonstrated particulars to universals glorify this method of inductive philosophy and reject that of Plato, which they treat as unsubstantial. Professor Draper laments that such speculative mystics as Ammonius, Saccas, and Plotinus should have taken the place of the severe geometers of the old museum. He forgets that geometry of all science is the only one which proceeds from universals to particulars, was precisely the method employed by Plato in his philosophy. As long as exact science confines its observations to physical conditions and proceeds Aristotle-like, it certainly cannot fail. But notwithstanding that the world of matter is boundless for us, it still is finite, and thus materialism will turn forever in this vitiated circle, unable to soar higher than the circumference will permit. The cosmological theory of numerals, which Pythagoras learned from the Egyptian hierophants, is alone able to reconcile the two units, matter and spirit, and cause each to demonstrate the other mathematically. The sacred numbers of the universe, in their esoteric unsolve the great problem and explain the theory of radiation and the cycle of the emanations. The lower orders, before they develop into higher ones, must emanate from the higher spiritual ones, and then arrive at the turning point, be reabsorbed again into the infinite. Physiology, like everything else in this world of constant evolution, is subject to the cyclic revolution. As it now seems to be hardly emerging from the shadows of the lower arc, so it may be one day proved to have been at the highest point of the circumference of the circle far earlier than the days of Pythagoras. Moccus, the Sidonian, the physiologist and the teacher of the science of anatomy, flourished long before the sage of Samos, and the latter received the sacred instructions from his disciples and descendants. Pythagoras, the pure philosopher, the deeply versed in the profound phenomena of nature, the noble inheritor of the ancient lore, whose great aim was to free the soul from the fetters of sense and force it to realize its powers, must live eternally in human memory. The impenetrable veil of arcane secrecy was thrown over the sciences taught in the sanctuary. This is the cause of the modern depreciating of the ancient philosophies. Even Plato and Philogidus have been accused by many a commentator of absurd inconsistencies, whereas the design which underlies the maze of metaphysical contradictions so perplexing to the reader of the Timaeus is but too evident. But has Plato ever been read understandingly by one of the expounders of the classics?